My name is Jason Freeman, and I'm pleased to join you all here to introduce tonight's guest, Benjamin Herold. Public education reporter Benjamin Herold's stories, features, and investigative exposés have appeared in Education Week, PBS NewsHour, I hope I don't pronounce this wrong, the Hechinger Report, did I get it right? NPR, and the Public School Notebook, among other publications. The recipient of a master's degree in urban education from Temple University and first place awards from the Education Writers Association, Herold formerly worked as a researcher, documentary filmmaker, and training specialist for rape crisis and domestic violence prevention organizations. He joins us tonight with his new book, Disillusioned: 5 Families and the Unraveling of America's Suburbs. In it, he offers a timely examination of the hope and hazards suburban public schools and school boards offer in the fight to renew the promise of historical American middle-class ideals. A New York Times book review calls it engrossing, an important, clear-eyed account of suburban boom and bust and the challenges facing the country today. Tonight, Ben will be joined in conversation with Kristen Graham. She is the education reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, also a native Philadelphian and a 2015 Kiplinger Fellow in Public Affairs Journalism at Ohio State University. She has also covered the crime and county beats for our city's newspaper of record. Everyone, please join me in welcoming tonight's guests to the Free Library of Philadelphia.
Happy Pub Day, Ben.
Thank you very much.
So, how does it feel to have your first book out in the world now?
Well, it's pretty incredible, I'd say, and it's especially incredible to be here celebrating it with all of you. Many of you know that I got my start here in Philadelphia, covering Philadelphia public schools, and it was really, many of the people in this room who nurtured me and developed me as a writer. And you, Kristen, as a competition early on, who kind of set a bar of excellence that I feel like I'm still trying to reach. So thanks to the library for hosting this. Thank you all for coming out on a Tuesday night. And thank you, Kristen, for being here with us.
My pleasure. I'm going to resist the urge to live tweet this and act like it's a board meeting. But first, kudos. I read and devoured and loved Disillusioned. Could you tell us a little bit about where the book came from? When did the seed plant itself? And how did you come to write a book about what the New York Times Book Review called this week engrossing, an important, clear-eyed account of suburban boom and bust and the challenges facing the country today?
Well, I actually grew up in a suburb of Pittsburgh. It's called Penn Hills, about 10 miles east of downtown Pittsburgh. And so it's kind of a classic post-war suburb. Up until the 40s, it was really rolling hills and farmland and coal mines and not much happening. And then after the war, when the U.S. government started investing heavily in suburbanization, it developed almost overnight. And so my family moved in the 1970s, and I had, what in many ways was the stereotypical suburban experience of good public schools, lots of financial benefits for living there in terms of tax breaks and mortgages and new infrastructure. Like all of the benefits of suburbia really accrued to me, and particularly in the public schools. And so one of the stories that I think about a lot, reflecting on that time in Dibble, was I was in 3rd grade, and I was kind of the kind of kid who would get bored and distracted, and I would finish my work and I would start drawing on the desk. And it was like a minor misbehavior, but instead of punishing me, my teacher actually brought in a typewriter from home, and she said, "Ben, whenever you get bored, I want just go back and use a typewriter to turn it loose." And so that was actually my first newspaper job. I started a class newspaper called Up to Date with Room 38. And so
it's a fantastic title.
And my mom saved every copy, so I still have them, which is amazing. Thank you, Mom. But so when I graduated Penn Hills in 1994, and I couldn't wait to leave. I thought the real world was happening somewhere else, and I left, and I didn't really look back until 2015, and all of these headlines started coming out of Penn Hills. Like the school district somehow had run up this $172 million debt. Teachers were being furloughed, property taxes were skyrocketing, home values were really stagnating. And I was just wondering, like, what the heck happened? And is it just happening in Penn Hills, or is this some wider phenomenon?
And you talk about the post-World War II American suburbs as a kind of Ponzi scheme, right? There's this rapid growth and, the sort of benefits you mentioned, tax breaks, things like that. and then sticking the folks who come later with paying the bill. Where are we in that cycle now? And could you talk a little bit about, this Ponzi scheme?
So when I saw that dynamic happening in Penn Hills and really realized that, wait a second, all of the opportunities that I got from growing up there, particularly from the public schools, we had never really paid full cost for that. We kind of kept pushing the cost of renewing that, repairing that, off onto the future without thinking about it. And so when I came back to Penn Hills in 2020 and saw the straits that the town was in, it was really realizing, like, oh, wait, someone's paying for it. It's just not me and my family. The families who live there now are the ones paying for that. And so that was really upsetting. And what I wanted to know is this happening elsewhere? And so I ended up spending time in following families in suburban communities outside of Atlanta, Dallas, Chicago, and Los Angeles, as well as Pittsburgh. And what I found is there's this kind of, like you said, this racialized Ponzi scheme where predominantly white families kind of get a community, are able to extract all of these resources and benefits from it without paying the full cost, pushing the cost off into the future, and then right when the bills start to come due, families leave. And someone comes behind and has to pick up that mess. And so it's hard to see in an individual suburban community with a snapshot at a single point in time because it plays out over generations and over whole metropolitan areas. But seeing the 5 communities that I focused on, you could kind of see from these new ex-urban communities going up outside of Dallas, where that cycle is just starting now, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, to Compton, California, which had already gone through all of this in the 60s and 70s and is only now just kind of coming out the other side of it.
There were a lot of light bulb moments for me reading your book. One came when you talked about your own experience in Penn Hills. I love the typewriter story. My first newspaper was the Graham Gazette, but I loved Up to Date with Room 38. When you were an elementary school student chosen for Author Day, I think it was, something profound happened, but it wasn't profound in the way you thought it was at the time. Could you tell us that story and talk about a little bit about what it means to you now?
Yeah, when I look back again, like, starting Up to Date with Room 38, it was like each opportunity that I got kind of opened up 2 more opportunities, starting at a very young age. And so by the time I was in 5th or 6th grade, I got selected for this Author Day event. It was kids from all over Penn Hills who were identified as promising writers, and we kind of came together to school, and it was like a day of writing workshops. And honestly, I don't remember anything about the writing stuff. But what I remember was lunch was outside, and I was sitting on the playground, and I was the kind of kid who I would just get lost in my own mind, and I missed the bell to kind of come back in, and so I look up, and I'm like, oh, wait, I'm the only one out here, and I see this purse lying on the ground. And I still can't, other than I was just a kid and I was being stupid, I can't tell you why I did it, but I went and I took the money out of the purse. And so, I go back into the writing workshop, and I have my, $5 in my pocket or whatever it is, and then someone had seen me. And so the adults come and pull me out of the writing workshop, and I was just like petrified. I mean, my arms are covered in sweat. I'm like preparing the full confession in my head.
Yep.
But before I even had a chance to confess, what the adults told me was, hey, you're a good kid, you have a bright future, don't screw it up, we're not going to punish you, discipline will be handled by your parents, go back into the writing workshop, we don't want you to miss the rest of it. And so that was a real gift to me, and again, that kind of Author's Day kind of opened 2 more opportunities for me after that. But at those kinds of moments that I took for granted for much of my life, took on a real new meaning and kind of tenor when I started talking to suburban families of color in other parts of the country, particularly the family, the Robinsons, who I met in Gwinnett County outside of Atlanta, where their son had a very different experience of very similar dynamics.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the Robinsons in Gwinnett. On paper, the family has everything going for them. They seem like I want to be friends with them. Mom, Nika, and Dad, Anthony, have advanced degrees. They have great jobs. Nika's was, at the time you wrote the book, was going for her PhD. They were super involved in their kids' education to the degree that Anthony, retaught, I think it was geometry, to Cory at night. But the system didn't work for them. Talk a little bit about their story and what that shows.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, they're kind of like a classic kind of early 2000s Atlanta family. They both came to Atlanta to get advanced degrees, settled there, said, okay, Dad's working as a network engineer, Mom and master's in public health. And so, of course, we're going to move to the suburbs. And so they buy this beautiful house way up 45 minutes from downtown in northern Gwinnett County. And it was kind of that feeling of okay, we can just kind of set it and forget it now. We're paying our property taxes, we have a house that's the best school in the county right down the street, so we don't have to worry about it. And things were kind of okay until their oldest son, Cory, hit middle school. And then it was, he was a middle school boy, and he's like a physical boy and just a lot of energy, very funny, likes to clown around. But so all of these little things that would happen, like tapping his pencil too loudly in class, going to the bathroom and spending too long there. You know, there would be like these incidents, you know, how boys already smack each other on the back of the head, and like that stuff started getting classified as
kids.
fights. Yeah. And so it just started escalating and escalating and escalating to the point where, you know, mom and dad were actually like, we are concerned where this is heading. Like, this seems to be escalating very fast. And so they end up having this meeting at the school where they go up to try and talk about it. And when I talked to Nika about this later, she's like, listen, we love education, we love learning, and we really feel like we want to be in partnership with the school. And we're trying to tell them again and again and again, we're here as a team, we want to partner with you. But the school just wasn't able to receive that message, and they kept kind of alienating the family and pushing them off. And so it comes to the point where they have this kind of meeting, and there's this confrontation where the school district administrators essentially surprise them and say, we're referring to your son to what's called the SST in Gwinnett County. So it's essentially like a special education referral that can kind of tee you up for more discipline. And they're like, what the heck is happening here? And so, but the thing that was so fascinating to me is that Nika, the mom, she immediately said, like, listen, what you don't understand is I know exactly what you're doing because I work in management. You're trying to document my son to death so you can get him put out. I know because I've done it myself, but there's no way we're going to stand for this. And so they end up having to pull their son out of the school that they built their life around,
Right.
sending him back to live with his grandparents to finish 7th grade.
And then kind of the continuation of that, I remember when the pandemic starts, because you're following them over a period of time, I was just struck by the fact that, you know, a lot of kids struggled in the pandemic, right? Remote learning, you're not with your friends, whatever. But Cory really thrived, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was this eye-opening experience for me because, again, I was, you know, I'm trying to report on this remotely, so I would be like on FaceTime while the kids were in the remote class, and I'm trying to kind of follow along. But like you could see Cory's like light come back. Like, again, he's a high-energy kid, very funny, very sweet. And being at home, it was just like, you know, I talked to Nika, she's like, I have my Cory back. Like, he's come back, I see him now.
Right, because he's tapping his pencil on the desk, and, you know, he's muted, no one can hear it. Who
Right.
cares?
And
He's doing his
singing,
work.
And he's like, what he told me was like, listen, I can get up and get an orange whenever I want.
Yep.
And it was like that kind of thing, but he just felt like himself. And so, but it became this real intense, like personal moment for Nika and Anthony as his parents, because they're like, on one hand, it's great to have our son back, but on the other hand, it's like, wow, we were complicit in this kind of message of you have to tone yourself down. You can't be who you are. You have to temper your physicality. You can't be loud. You can't sing. You can't pound out beats. And they're like, we thought we were fighting against that, but we were actually reinforcing that. And so it became this very personal kind of moment of like, wow, we're part of the problem too.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the family outside Dallas and their experience. This is a white conservative family, you know, in the Texas suburbs. And they also decided to move for better schools for their kids. Talk a little bit about that journey.
When I met Susan and Jim Becker, they were living in Plano, Texas, which is a large suburban community, like kind of second ring outside Dallas. And they had actually met in the early 2000s while they were working as bankruptcy consultants on the Enron collapse.
Right? Yep.
So Enron brought them together. And so very nice people. And so they said, you know, they kind of fell in love while working as consultants on this. And so, you know, a couple years later, they're engaged to be married, and you know, they said, okay, we're going to go start looking at houses. And so Plano was the place to go if you were like, you know, well-to-do and white and professional. Like Plano was the place at that time. So they, you know, almost overnight kind of find their dream house. It's a quarter mile from the public school down the road, and they're kind of thrilled with it. But by the time their son was ready to start first grade, which is like 8 or 9 years later, the demographics of the school had totally changed. So a lot of families like the Robinsons had moved into Plano.
Right.
And so the Beckers were having this other kind of experience of it, of like, we're not so comfortable about this school anymore. And so they send their child to the school down the street for a year and are just, you know, they feel it's not working for him. So they pull him out of the public school, and then they kind of go on this, the Jim kind of jokingly called it our journey through Sinai. And so they go to charter schools and private schools, and they're trying everything. And so eventually they decide they're going to move out further. They're going to move out to an ex-urban community called Lucas, where, you know, it's really just being built up now. If you drive around, you'll still see longhorn cattle on the side of the road sometimes, you know, big 5,000, 6,000 square foot McMansions going up. And for them, it was this sense of, we thought maybe this version of suburbia where we can be around people who are like us and share our values, and, you know, our kids will go to school with the same families that we go to church with, and this kind of, you know, traditional 50s, 60s version of suburbia, like, okay, we think this is maybe where we can find it. But two things kind of complicated that. So one, the price of entry is almost $900,000 now. And then two, they get there and they find that all of the things they've been trying to kind of shield their family from and kind of remove themselves from, they can't avoid anymore. So they end up having a very similar reckoning of saying, hey, suburbia isn't working for us either. And they end up pulling their children out of the public schools that they moved their whole life to, paid almost $1 million to move into this community for. After a single year, pull their kids out of the school and start them in an online school run by the Birch Society.
One of the more stunning things, and there were a lot of stunning things in the book, was, I think you mentioned when you talked about the price of entry into Lucas, the mortgage applications of black folks were denied at a much, much higher rate, I think 23% higher. And just the fact that the community was zoned in a way that renters basically couldn't make it.
And so, we talked earlier about this kind of cycle of suburbia, and part of the reason I really wanted to be in Lucas is because it's really just growing and building at the time that I started reporting there. And so a lot of these kind of when many post-war suburbs were first built, it was in some of the pre-war suburbs, it was very explicit. There were racial covenants in the real estate deeds saying it is illegal to sell to a black family, or there were kind of zoning codes that were very explicit. Similar techniques now, just a little more subtle.
Right.
And so I went, the first time I went there on a reporting trip, I went on a tour of the high school. And it's this big kind of cavernous building, and you have kind of the engineering wing on one side and the visual arts wing on the other, just beautiful facility. I'd done a little research beforehand. I knew the demographics of, it's called Lovejoy ISD, were very different than, say, Plano or Allen next door. So Lovejoy, it was 75% white, less than 3% poor, only a handful of kids who were learning English. It's a very different demographic. And so I asked the person giving me the tour, why do you think your demographics are so different? And she turned to me and she said, septic tanks. And I was like, what on earth are you talking about? You have to explain this to me. So it was all kind of baked into the local zoning code. So the communities have been very intentional about it. They said there's a 17 square mile area that is served by this school district. We're going to make it entirely residential. So there's no retail, there's no service workers, it's only houses here. And then we're also going to say that all of these houses have to be on lots that are at least an acre large, and in many of the subdivisions, 2.5 acres large.
Wow.
So these are huge houses. And then to kind of cap it off, they say, and we're not going to put any sewers in this community. So that means every house has to have its own septic system. And so what they told me, and this was a point of, kind of a point of pride, a selling point for them, they said not a single child in the school district lives in an apartment.
Wow. That's, wow.
And so, but again, it was like, they were attracting in families from all over North Texas.
Right.
Who, and for families like the Beckers, it becomes a great deal because you're essentially getting a private school style education without having to pay tuition. And you're getting this, house that is almost guaranteed to appreciate in value, at least in the short term, because only other expensive houses can be built nearby. And then, like you mentioned, like in the real estate market, like in the way that banks, were kind of evaluating loans, there's this kind of discrimination that's hard to see, but when you look at the numbers, you see it's kind of cooked into the system there. And so there's this kind of invisible filtering system that for a while works really well for that community because they have lower expenses and more money. So they can offer electives, they have virtual reality systems, they have rock climbing walls, like you name it, they had it, until all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore. And then all of the costs, because all of that's funded with bond debt, so all of the costs start coming due. And the mindset of the families is like, well, like one of the dads that I met down there who had just moved as well, he told me very explicitly, it's like, don't think for a second that if Lovejoy schools start struggling that I won't move somewhere else. And so it just kind of repeats the cycle over and over again.
I'm interested when you were talking to the Beckers about, their decision to leave Plano and move to the Lovejoy district. I'm guessing that, did you say, what do you think about, you're moving from a school system that has a lot of diversity to a school system that's not diverse? Was that something that entered their thought pattern? Did they, confront the racial dynamics of it at all?
It wasn't something they wanted to talk about. So I certainly asked them about it. And they would say, well, we don't really think about those things. We're colorblind. We kind of judge people on the basis of their character.
Yep.
And so, but, kind of the part of what I try to do with Disillusioned is I want readers, as you read this, I want you to see the world through their eyes.
Yes.
And how they make sense of it, but also see their story next to the Robinson story, next to the other family stories. So you can kind of see there's this kind of individual choices that we make and things we choose to talk about and choose not to talk about. But that doesn't mean it's not happening somewhere else.
And they didn't have to confront it, right? Society didn't make them confront it. They had the resources and they had, the privilege on their side that they didn't have to confront it.
That was the hope, and I think that kind of changed, particularly, starting around the time of the pandemic, when it felt like all of these outside forces that they were very uncomfortable with start to intrude on their lives in a way that, very upsetting. And then also just kind of the sense that, part of what I hope the book can really do is, like, we're very bad as a country, I think, at, like, holding these multiple stories together in the same space. And, like, COVID ends up being a powerful example of that. So for, like, the Beckers, they were very, very adamant and upset about their children being forced to wear masks in the schools. That was part of the reasons they pulled their children out. And it's a very deeply held belief, like, very sincerely held belief. Felt like it was kind of a affront on their freedom. But for the Robinsons, the African-American family in Gwinnett County, they also had a difficult experience with COVID. They lost 2 of their uncles, and so those 2 things, like, it's also
They
a
wanted
deeply
the
held
schools to
experience.
keep their kids safe.
Yeah, and so it's like we're not good at holding those stories together, but hopefully the book will be a space where we can kind of consider them side by side.
Well, there's a lot of weighty and disturbing things in Disillusioned, but tell me something good. I'm thinking about the hope you found in Compton. What can we replicate from that model? Is there a bright side? And side note, Jacob, the bright boy in Compton, like, is he as amazing as he seems? Because I really want to work for him someday.
Yeah, he totally is. So again, Compton, we have, these kind of decades worth of, like, myths and stereotypes built up of a Compton. It's kind of like synonymous with, like, urban dysfunction and blight and crime and all of those things. But Compton really has this kind of rich suburban history. And it was a place that really pioneered the use of racially restrictive covenants back in the 1920s. And so by the 1940s, it's an almost all-white community, and the white people there are fighting very hard to keep it that way.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of demographic pressure starting to kind of happen. So, by the late 1940s, actually the Bush family lived in Compton, which I had no idea about. That blew my mind. But George H.W. Bush, Barbara Bush, and George W. Bush lived in Compton for a brief period of time. And it was right after they left that this whole cycle we've been talking about started to kind of kick in. So you had the demographic changes, you had white flight, you had a lot of capital disinvestment, so all the downtown stores start going vacant. And then the bottom just kind of falls out, starting in the public schools. So 1970s, early 1970s, you have a bunch of murders inside Compton public schools, you have these financial crises, you have just like, all the wood shop equipment getting stolen out of a building, just like crazy, crazy stuff, and it accumulates, and so the bottom really falls out. But by the time I kind of come around, there's this new superintendent, and they're like 7 or 8 years into this, really pretty remarkable turnaround. And so I ended up spending a lot of time at an elementary school called Jefferson Elementary. And, like, if you see it from the outside, it would be like not something you would think too highly of. Like, it's a lot of, like, single-story bungalow buildings, not many windows, kind of run down. But I was spending time in this 4th grade classroom, and I met this boy named Jacob Hernandez. And so his parents are undocumented immigrants from Mexico. He was born on U.S. soil, so he's a U.S. citizen. And he's just the kind of kid where you're just like, man, I just want to follow you around, whatever you do. So that's the good thing about the job, is you actually get to follow him around. And so, like, during the time that I watched him, like, he tried to start his own class newspaper, which was like, melted my heart. They did these, like, hands-on engineering projects, and he was the kind of kid where he would kind of get everyone organized, have them what to do, and then he would just, like, ask questions and just, like, pull ideas out of other kids in this way is just so remarkable. And, like, all the teachers see this and say, this boy has real leadership potential. So then they started doing what my teachers did for me in Penn Hill, start creating more opportunities for him. So he's making videos on green screens, and, they have, like, app challenges, coding challenges, all of these different things, mock trials. And the thing that I end up, like, when I think about Jacob, that I think about a lot, is there was this essay that he had to write. And the question was, imagine yourself working at Lucasfilms. What is a typical day in your life? And so he crushed it. He's like, I woke up, I got in my Tesla, I drive over. And then he's like, I met Luke in the front door. I said, what's up, Luke? And he's like, I'm prototyping new lightsabers, I'm designing new droids. But the thing about it that was so beautiful was it was so easy and natural for him to imagine himself into all of these different futures, and all of the educators and administrators. I mean, it's still, Compton's still a tough place in many regards, but there was really this system-wide sense of, we have to nurture the gifts that the children we have now, even though these are the kids that have typically, historically been excluded from suburbia, these are the kids that we have now, and they're our future, and we have to invest in them, not just with resources, but with opportunities and grace and care and kindness as well. Absolutely.
Could you talk a little bit about how your time covering Philadelphia schools shaped your reporting and research?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, I started covering Philadelphia schools, I guess probably around 2010, 11, and I was working for a nonprofit news outlet called the Public School Notebook.
That's right.
And so I see Paul, and I think Dale might be here as well. And so there was this whole community around the notebook that really nurtured and developed me. And so, which was good, because I really got thrown into the deep end, because it was a tough time for the city schools at that point.
That was
And then
some wild days.
I'm competing with Kristen, and like 6 months after I start, she wins the Pulitzer. So I'm like, what did I get myself into here? But the thing that I kind of walked away with was like, Philly is a place where there's a lot of people who have something to say, and they really care about it, and they believe it for a reason. And they're going to tell you about it on Twitter and in the notebook comments,
Sure
and they
are.
see you on the street and at the grocery store. Like, you're going to hear it, and you have to learn how to listen through that. And I felt like that really helped me navigating these kind of other contexts to say, I felt like I learned how to listen, not just to what people felt and what they felt strongly about and why they felt strongly about it, but I kind of learned to listen to myself as well, to say, what's my guide, what's my conscience, what's my kind of priorities and values in this. And then there was like this layer underneath it. So one of the things I still have over my desk at home where I work is a testimony that a teacher at Taylor Elementary gave when they tried to close Taylor in the mid-2010s. And it was this sense that she got up there, she was a teacher who had been at this school for 27 years. And this was a very fraught time, school districts closing dozens of schools, it was just a mess. And this had been a very contentious SRC meeting. And this teacher gets up and she just reads like this most beautiful thing. And the line that I still look at like all the time is she said, you're going to hear all of the arguments about all of the policy things and all of the reasons you should close it and shouldn't close it, but I want you to know is that Taylor Elementary School is a place of quiet love. Mm. And that just I think about that all the time, and like that's why I love writing about schools, is that there are these places. It is, and there are these amazing places that are like portals into everything we care about most. And so having that experience in Philadelphia of learning to see that and to find it and be part of it, and then bringing that back to the community where I grew up, bringing it back to other communities. So I could see, like, a lot of people were like, why are you going to, take this opportunity to write your first book, write about the suburbs? Suburbs are boring. No one cares about the suburbs. Or, like, why are you out here trying to say the suburbs have all these problems? We all know suburbia is great and everything, like, that's where everyone's trying to get. And so for me, like, having learned to trust myself and then learn to kind of recognize those patterns was something that Philadelphia really gave me, and many of the people in this room really gave me, which I'm very grateful for.
That's great. Well, now we have a special treat for you. We're going to bring a guest up to the stage. Ben, I think you should have the honor of introducing our guest.
So when I went back to Penn Hills, the community where I grew up outside of Pittsburgh, I went back to see my old house, but I also went back and I had a piece of paper in my pocket and it had all of the properties on that street that had recently sold. So I wanted to know the experiences of people who had moved in now. So one of the houses listed on this thing I had in my pocket was a house 3 doors down from the place where I grew up. And so I still remember vividly walking up and there was this planter on the corner of the yard and it had 2 flags stuck in it. There was an American flag and then there was a Black Liberation flag. And I was just like, all right, I got to go knock on this door. And so I went up and I knocked on the door, and that's when I met Bethany Smith, who you will now get to meet as well.
Thank you so much for joining us. I hope no one's heckled you about the Steelers here, as we tend to do in Philadelphia.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
So we know Ben's side of the story. So what did you think when this guy knocks on your door and makes his elevator pitch about what he wanted to write about?
When he first knocked, I said, what does this guy want? But he told me about what he was doing, and automatically I was intrigued. And as he asked more questions, I was intrigued.
So just a little backstory for the audience. You had moved to Penn Hills shortly before then, or you had bought your house shortly before then, but had been in Penn Hills for a little while before?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And your son was Jackson, right?
Yeah.
How old was Jackson when Ben knocked?
Oh, 2nd grade, we'll say about 7.
Okay.
About 6, 7, something like that.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what the process of participating in Disillusioned was like. What was it? He's asking a lot of questions. He's, as I recall reading, he's constantly asking you, so what do you want from the suburbs?
Yes,
what was that like to have him hectoring you all the time?
When he asked me that question, I didn't know how to answer it. I never thought, oh, what do I want from the suburbs? Because to me, moving to Penn Hills, it wasn't like, oh, I made it. It was a place that had affordable living, so it worked for myself and my family. With Ben asking me all the questions and sometimes personal, I have to admit it was kind of like therapy. It really was, because I was going through something at that time. I just pulled my son from a charter school and put him into Penn Hills Elementary School. And it was like therapy. I was able to talk, and Ben is a great listener.
I wonder if the two of you could talk a little bit about, Bethany, you ended up writing the epilogue of the book, which was amazing.
Thank you.
I wonder if, Ben, you and Bethany could talk a little bit about, that process, because things weren't always smooth, right? Like there was a point in the reporting when you were like, I need a minute from this guy.
Yes, there were a couple moments where I needed a break. And I would say how the epilogue even came about, because I was sharing so much about myself. It was like American history just kept flashing through my mind. Here it is, another white guy or white folks taking from black folks and not compensating them or not telling the story the right way. And I told Ben that. I got to the point I was really uncomfortable, and I let Ben know, and he didn't turn me away. He listened to me, he understood, and that's how we came about me writing the epilogue. Yeah.
If I might jump in there quickly. So I was not a quick process. So when you told me that, I did a lot of hemming and hawing. I was like, well, and so we didn't talk for at least a good month.
Yes.
And then I sent some emails I don't think you ever opened.
No, I did not. No.
But when we eventually did talk, it was actually, that was a real gift to me to have that time and be forced to reflect, because everything you said was true. There was no denying everything that you had said. And there was no denying the dynamic that had kind of set up between us. And so what having that kind of time to have to figure it out really did was I had to listen better and accept that what you were saying was true and honest, even if it was uncomfortable for me. And so what that made me really do and became really a key part of Disillusioned was say, when we talk about race in the suburbs, what we're really talking about is whiteness and my white racial identity and the things the kind of patterns that come with that. And so I really honestly don't know I can't remember where the idea about the epilogue came, but I just felt like I enjoyed talking to you so much, and every time you would always surprise me. So it just had this sense of if there's a space here, you're gonna do something beautiful. And so then after, we kind of had that conversation of would you be interested in writing for it? Then Bethany told me about all of your experience as a writer, and there was something you wanted to do, and it was just it became this beautiful thing, and what she wrote is just absolutely incredible.
It was the perfect coda to the book, right?
Thank you.
And one of the things that I've been as we talked about this coming into tonight, it seems like you've really gotten involved in public education. And can you talk a little bit about the work you're doing now?
Yes. One thing that's in the book. I was involved with a lot of community service before I became a parent.
Absolutely.
Before I became a parent. Once I became a parent, I just shut everything down and focused on my son. And Ben, with his many questions and just encouraging me, it had me look at things differently, especially what was going on in Penn Hills. And I found education voters and was accepted into their fellowship program to basically what we do is advocate for state funding. My job, I talk to other parents, I educate them. We have trainings twice a month. I get educated. I pay attention to what's going on here in Pennsylvania, and my job is to get that information out to other concerned parents and community members.
That's fantastic, and you all had a big victory with the Commonwealth court case.
Yes.
Really good.
So the question was, how did I pick the families? I actually started with the communities. And so, again, when I had this kind of sense of, what's happening in Penn Hills isn't just unique to Penn Hills. It's part of this kind of larger cycle. I really wanted to kind of get to know communities that were at each stage of that cycle so we can kind of see the larger pattern by looking at the stories side by side. And so once I kind of got to know the communities, then it was kind of a lot of just the shoe leather work of reporting. So knocking on doors, kind of cold calls. The Beckers in Lucas, Texas, I actually met through their realtor. So when getting to know the district a little bit, it was clear that they were very active about trying to attract families in. So I said, oh, are there any local realtors who you would recommend? And they said, oh, well, yeah, the biggest local realtor is actually on the board of our foundation, and it has two kids in the school district. So, and then I met him, and he was like, oh, I have the perfect family. They're just about to buy this house here. In Gwinnett County with the Robinsons, I met them through an advocacy organization called Gwinnett Stop that is really about trying to end the school-to-prison pipeline. And so I got to know the director of that organization, and she actually called together a group of parents, and I met them at Panera Bread. And we're sitting in the, having bread bowls and lemonade and kind of hearing about all of these stories. And what I heard from, I met Nika that night and was hearing about some of her frustrations with her son and her, but there were 6 other parents who had stories that were just as troubling and unnerving as what she said. So it was like, clearly there's a pattern there. In Evanston, Illinois, which is like a progressive, pretty affluent college town just north of Chicago on Lake Michigan, there was a group of activist parents that I got to know there, and that became a really fascinating place because it was a place that really prized itself on its diversity and on its efforts to desegregate its schools, which went back 50 years. But right when the time that I started getting there, there was this sense of, we've been fighting to kind of maintain racial balance and integration for a long time here, but we're still not seeing the things that we want to see. Like, there's still big achievement and opportunity gaps. There's still, lots of problems and conflicts in the school. And so the mom I ended up getting to know there, she was multiracial, and her son was in 1st grade and actually had been called a racial slur in school. And she was just like, I did not come here for this, and I'm not going to let you sweep this under the rug. And so she was part of this activist group that ended up essentially taking control of the school board and trying to put racial equity at the center of what Evanston was doing. And then in Compton, I met the Hernandez family through Jefferson Elementary. I got to know the school, and they were like, you got to meet Jacob. So we ended up that way.
Hi, I'm a little bit nervous, so bear with me. But the first thought that did come to my mind was your white identity, writing a book about the topic you chose. So I was very shocked that you had Bethany come up here and speak. So I think that that gives me a lot of hope for the future of journalism, because there have been a lot of stories told by people who did not live or experience those stories and didn't care to truly understand them. So I just want to say I'm really, really glad that you took the time to truly put your best foot forward in that aspect. And I just wanted to make a comment on the fact that I see a lot of similarities between suburban schools and inner city schools. I kind of always thought that there were polar opposites. I grew up at a small high school in New York City, and we were in a huge, it used to be an all office building. There were 6 schools on each floor. We all shared one building. So I kind of always pictured suburban schools to be like college campuses, which some are. So it's really interesting for me to see that there are very similar issues that are dealt with. I guess I'm just wondering if you saw any of those similarities as well.
Yeah, thank you. Both of those are just great observations, and I'll try and address both, and Bethany, if you would like to as well. On the issue of me being white, like, that was something that I thought I had a handle on kind of going into it, and then meeting families and kind of learning more, it was like, oh wait, I haven't done enough work. So I really had to do but personal work and like do some homework. Like, there was a lot of stuff about my hometown and the racial conflict and strife in Penn Hills that went way back to 60s and 70s that I had just never heard of. I had never learned about it. It wasn't something that we talked about growing up. So part of it was, just doing the work. But there's also part of it of like what I want, people to, as you read the book, to understand that I'm just one person with my own background, my own baggage that I bring, and I try to be transparent about that. And you can evaluate if you trust me or don't. Hopefully you will. But I want you to know who I am and how I came to be the person that I am, so that you can hear the story through my eyes, but then also through everybody else's eyes as well, because it's just one voice. And so I'm very grateful to Bethany in particular for actually, taking on writing part of it, not just sharing the story, but like in your own words, in your own ways. So I think that really drove home the point that like there's lots of different perspectives on this. What I'm trying to do is provide a window to consider it from lots of different viewpoints. And then to your point about, suburbia versus inner city, like, that's part of why Compton became so powerful for me, because it was like we have this idea of like what a suburb is, and if it doesn't look like that anymore, then we don't think it's a suburb. But it's still the same suburb, it's just not all white people and not racially exclusive anymore. And so having to, like, even in Philadelphia area, like, there's lots of different types of suburbs around Philadelphia. Like, Upper Darby is different from Ben Salem, is different from South Jersey, is different from North Bucks, you know what I mean? So, like, there's a lot of different kinds of suburbs. And so I think, you know, part of what I hope the book will do is, like, allow us to have a richer and more honest conversation about what suburbia actually is, and not just kind of live in our myths about it.
I don't have much to add to that, except for I thought what Ben was doing with this book was something special, and like working with him and him interviewing me, I always ask him, like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And his reasons were good, but then it got to the point, like, why shouldn't he do this? Like, if anybody was to tell this story, it would be a white man to tell this story. So I just hope that it's received by all so that the conversations can start.
Hi, my name's Quentin. I actually grew up in a suburb very much like some of the suburbs that you're talking about in South Orange, New Jersey, Maplewood, New Jersey. It's actually the town where SZA is from, or Lauryn Hill, for those who might be familiar with those artists. Number one, I did also want to thank you both, and thank you both for your courage. And I think that you, not only through writing the book, shed light and insight on systemic issues, but you also demonstrate what it means to do the work and how that can sometimes be uncomfortable and force us to make changes and shifts that maybe we weren't initially prepared for, because oftentimes that does pop up when we're least expecting it. So thank you also for speaking your voice and your perspective, because I think that, especially now that the book is out, you can appreciate the ripple effects of, you know, the dynamic that you held the author to, the standards that you encouraged the author to consider. My question is, could you talk a little bit about, Benjamin, can you talk a little bit about your approach to not finding the stories, but how you wanted to structure those stories so that they could be, as you're looking at, as consistent a set of data as well as anecdotes as possible?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question and the observation, and they both kind of feed together. So, you know, the first thing you said is exactly how I tried to approach it, you know, kind of coming at it from two angles. Like, there are these big systemic patterns, politics, you know, economics, social patterns, demographic changes, all of that. So really kind of getting a handle on the big picture, but also understanding that we all live our lives, myself included, we all live our lives in relationship with those patterns. And we have to figure it out. And like, we figure it out based on where we are and who we are and what baggage we carry and what our backgrounds are, but we're all trying to figure that out. And so in getting to know Bethany and the other families in the book, and putting myself and my own family in the book, it was this sense of like, okay, how are we trying to navigate this thing that we are all a part of? And it was really important to me that it be the families that end up getting featured, like, it's just everyday families, you know what I mean? It's not, you know, people who are famous or anything like that. It's, you know, everyday parents trying to get the best for their kids and dealing with the things that everybody deals with. And so part of what became, you know, powerful for me was like a lot of these little moments that are so important, particularly as, you know, parents of a child coming through a school system. It's like often the little moments that become the really, really big moments. It's those moments when it's like you're tapping your pencil too loudly and someone is all of a sudden down your neck and it's like, what the heck just happened? Or it's the moment when it's like, one of the incidents described in the book is in Evanston. So the mom whose son was called a racial slur, the superintendent, who was a white man, called her. And I got to talk with both of them, like, in depth. They were like, why are you asking me about this again? But like, we rehashed it over and over, almost like a lawyer, to kind of understand where each was coming from. And so what the mom told me was like, at first, it was really wonderful. The superintendent took the time to reach out to me and tell me he was on it. Like, this was great. She's like, but then he kept talking. And so, knowing the superintendent, I was like, yeah, I can kind of see that. And so then he's, when he told it, he was like, well, what I really wanted, this mother to know was that, A, that I care, but B, that I know the teachers in the system. And so he ended up telling her, well, my son actually had the same teacher who was involved in this incident. And this teacher, he went on and on about how great the teacher was for his child. He said, I had actually, this is the superintendent, he said, I had, when my son was young, I went on a Fulbright scholarship, and we were in New Zealand, and my son was lonely, and so we reached out to the teacher, and the teacher actually Skyped with my son, and it was just I know he really cares. And so for him, from his vantage point, he's trying to form a connection, say, I understand, I know the teacher. But from the mom, she was all the good feelings she had from him calling, it was that was out the window real quick. Why do you think it's appropriate to tell me this right now about what your white son got when my black son is dealing with his other things? And so it's those moments, trying to unpack those, they're not small, but they're not stuff that we often pay a lot of attention to, or if we do, we tend to sensationalize them. So trying to pull those out and really dig into them is a lot of what the book ends up covering.
Hi, Ben.
Hey, Malika.
So I guess this is a two-part question. I was actually in Ben's documentary, and it's a question that I've had for many years. Where does your heart come from? Where does your fearlessness come from? Because I've known you to go into many an environment that I'm not sure a white man should go into. And you go in with a lot of heart, and you're confident in the fact that what you're going there for, you will receive. And I appreciate so much that you are enveloped by many families, and they welcome you warmly. But I know each time that you endeavor upon doing something, such as this lovely book, you face challenges that will never meet the pages, both with the families that you interact with as well as policymakers, et cetera. And I guess my secondary question is, what are some of those challenges that you face that will not reach these pages? Because I know that we live in Philadelphia, which is a lovely melting pot. It's full of diversity. We are here hugging, having a kumbaya moment that might not happen in a lot of these other environments. And you being a white guy who is a Philadelphian now, going into some of these more affluent, white environments and appearing like the environment, how did you navigate that? And how did you also keep a straight face and try to hide your Philadelphia?
That's a good question.
Yeah, definitely, especially after about 2016, say you're from Philadelphia and folks in Texas aren't trying to talk to you too much after that. But to your first question about, kind of who made me or where I come from, I mean, the first and most direct answer to that is my parents. And my mom is here today, so thank you, Mom. Really, I feel like I learned what listening was. I learned what care was. I learned what paying attention was from my parents and my mom in particular. And so that's a gift that I've tried to, take and protect, but also to grow and to be able to let that grow into new contexts, new relationships, new cities, all of those things. But you're right, it's still trying to report a book like this, I come with the baggage that I come with. And so part of what I feel like I've learned over the years is I don't have a whole lot of shame anymore. I'm gonna say stupid stuff. I'm gonna not understand basic things, and I'll just ask, can you please explain to me what just happened there? So for example, with the Robinson family in Gwinnett County, so I had heard this story about kind of coming to talk with the administrators, and I knew that there was a lot to it. But Nika, the mom, she kind of told me this kind of part that she had spent a lot of time with. She said, we invited Cory's grandma, we invited his minister, we invited his coach, we invited his mentor, we invited his best friend, or my best friend is her mom. And we all came to this meeting to try and work this out together. And it was one of those things where it was I kind of knew that there was something important happening there, but I also knew that I didn't understand it because there was a cultural disconnect. And so I said, can you explain that to me? And she was like, well, yeah, we wanted them to know that we were a good family. And the people at the school district said, those people can't come in, they're not family. And it was that moment of who counts, who matters, was so profound for that family. And if I hadn't, been willing to be, ignorant and to ask for help and understanding, I never would have fully understood that. And then there was a layer on top of that where the woman who actually was most adamant about saying these other, minister, coach, mentor, friends can't come in was a black woman. And so it was this extra layer of just pain and anger and frustration for the Robinsons of she knows what we're doing and she's choosing not to see it and accept it. And so, it's part of it was building relationships, and then a lot of it is just saying, can you please explain that to me because I don't understand.
So you have the perfect title of your book for the way I and many other people feel related to these days and the degree to which our country may be going backwards. And I just saw about a sweep in New Hampshire as we've been sitting here. And I'm curious, since you have an idea that is kind of geographically agnostic and you went here and there, how does the journey, or did the journey, inform, and what is your opinion about the degree to whether or not our country is going backwards, and should we be disillusioned?
Great question. Yeah. For me personally, disillusioned ends up having kind of a double meaning. So one, and most importantly, you know, particularly with the families of color that I got to know in suburbia, it was this sense of, you know, a lot of not just their dreams as individual families, but like our collective post-civil rights era dreams of like equal opportunity and we can build integrated communities. Like a lot of that got invested into suburbia. And there was still this sense of like, we're bringing these dreams here to try and make them happen in the suburbs now. And then that not working out is like really profound. It's not just that my kid isn't getting tended to in the way that he deserves or she deserves. It's the sense that this larger project maybe isn't working anymore. And so part of the disillusionment is the sense of like the dreams that we built suburbia on, they're kind of falling apart right now. Like this idea of like we can have, you know, white exclusion and we can have communities that, you know, kind of consolidate our racial and class advantages. Like the numbers just don't work on that anymore. Like that, it can't last. But these other kind of post-civil rights dreams around equal opportunity and integration aren't working very well in these communities either. So there's this sense of like we're feeling stuck. But the subtext for me in a lot of this was like part of going through the process of the reporting process and research process that we've been talking about. Like I felt like I had to shed a lot of my own illusions and about what suburbia is and kind of what, you know, what kind of communities we want to build. And part of what was so powerful to me about meeting and getting to know Bethany in particular was the sense that, you know, the community that you grew up in, the values that you brought to Penn Hills, the things that you're trying to build and make happen there, like they're rooted in a very important and powerful dream that's a deep part of the American tradition. And it's not something that has often been foregrounded. This idea that we will make a way. We will put together the pieces of what fell apart to build something new and beautiful. We will, you know, keep our dreams alive, if not for ourselves, for our children. Like that's the heart of what America is to me. But I wasn't there until I wrote this book.
I think that's all we have time for. Thank you all.